Okay. That didn't work for shit. Okay, we are streaming. Let's see what we got going on here, ladies and gentlemen. The ladies and the gentlemen. Now, if you're watching this after the fact, once again, of course, right over here, you go to where the clock reads 0 and you can get right into the story. You don't have to listen to all of my jibber jab, my BS business, as it might be known. Trying to see if we get some people lined up. We got to remember not to have the popping of the peas. Cobalt in the house. What's up, sir? How you doing? Oh my goodness. Oop, cancel. Chat. Found out there's another place that Michael Moore. What's up, buddy? Michael, we got to do a Fortnite pretty soon. We did not get that done when you were here. Sean, how are you? Hold on a second, guys. You gotta yell at the evil. Hey. Hey, could you make a cup of tea, please? Thanks, babe. Thought I had enough tea to last me through the read, but it turns out I don't. But I do have my awesome Krakens-esque tea mug. It's quite great. It's quite great. All right. Dawn in the house. Christine in the house. How's everybody doing tonight? Let's go back to channels and see how we got people coming on in. Once again, if you're watching this after the fact, move forward to this thing hitting 0 and you can go right into the story time. But since you're here, we have stuff to talk about. We are about to read the 6th Day of Deer Camp Part 2. We read all the days of deer camp about a year and a half ago on the stream, but that audio was not a good enough quality for the Death is Black audiobook, which will be out in 2025. So we're just redoing them, and it fits perfectly because it is deer season, which is really kind of fun. Let's go to Maine. I got something super cool here. Go to chat. My cousin, Minister Merciless, his band Super Weapon, will be playing a live stream all across the globe Thursday, December 5th, 8 p.m. Pacific, 11 p.m. Eastern. And you can watch that at youtube.com/wildcatguitars. Jot that down or go subscribe to their YouTube and just put it in your calendar. You should be able to see that. Should be uber fun. Uber fun. Back to Maine. Oops, hold on. Back to open. I know what I'm doing. Oh, and there's something else going on here too. Hold on. We've got brand new Krakens beanies in the store. So if you don't want your noggin to get cold, if you want a nice toasty noggin like the FDO, these are pretty slick. I'm really happy. I got these in the store last week. We were going to announce them in the previous 2 streams, but the previous 2 streams went tits up. We had a lot of technical issues, which I've finally worked through. So hopefully you guys like the looks of these hats. They are at scottsigler.com/store, and we'll be showing them off a little bit later as well when A comes on up. But right now, seems everybody can hear everything. The Recluse Mage, love it. What's up? Ishmael, how are you? Music is of the devil. Ishmael, you're talking about I don't know if Ishmael is a spam bot or is an actual person. Ishmael, please let us know if you are an actual real person. Take off, you hosers. Chris Grawl's in the house. The author of Trigger Guard, friend of the show. Cobalt says, I'm in Massachusetts. Winter is around the corner. Ishmael, I got an LOL out of Ishmael, so probably not a spammer. Spammers don't do that. Hello, Ishmael. Welcome again to the show. Yeah, that's about it. We're going to go live at 4 o'clock. Ishmael, I don't have a sense of humor. You have to understand this. I simply do not have a sense of humor. I grew up in the mean streets of Sheboygan, up there close to the UPA. And up there, ain't no time to laugh, you know. Ain't no time to laugh at all. Recluse Mage in NorCal tonight. Got some rain up there. Oh, yeah, that's right. What is that shit called? Actually, they actually are calling it the triple bomb cyclone this year. Like, it's stuff these names they make up sound like they are something in one of my books that would get edited out by an editor at Penguin Random House or Athon or somebody. Be like, yeah, you're not going to call the storm the triple bomb cyclone, bro. Not going to do that. That would be a very good name for a drink, though. We'll see if we get Dr. Daniel Baker, PhD mixologist, in here. Maybe he could make us a triple bomb cyclone drink. That'd be pretty sweet. That'd be pretty sweet. Pretty sweet. Don, I seriously, I have a cold black heart, no sense of humor, and I look like a walking cadaver. So if you look like a walking cadaver, you would also not have a sense of humor. It's just the way it goes. Just the way it goes. All right, we got YouTube coming on in, Facebook coming on in. Facebook's starting to crap on us again, not show everybody the notifications of the live. It's kind of crazy. Although this is a Thursday, and most everybody's used to watching this on a Wednesday, we had to bump it up a day for a trip I took to Burbank. Okay, we're gonna do the post-story chat pre-deep cuts. We're moving that back to after the fact. So A and I can go over that together. And then today in the deep cuts, we're going to talk about where you guys get your book recommendations. Where do you get ideas? Where do you find out about new books? Don't put them in the chat room now. Save your thoughts. And what makes you go check out a book further? And finally, what makes you buy a book? And that's important stuff for us to know, but also the world's changing so much. It'd be pretty cool to figure that out. So when A gets up here, we may interrupt the story just to go ahead and get the tea handoff. YouTube crushing it today. A lot of people in from YouTube. Hello, everybody in YouTube. How you all doing? Oh, I can't chat back here? That sucks. Oh, there it is. I've also recently learned that YouTube, Tyler Miller, what's up? YouTube is apparently the #1 podcast app in the world right now. More people get their podcasts through YouTube than anywhere else. And remember, they're counting all the video podcasts on YouTube. So, you know, the giant shows like Call Me Daddy, Joe Rogan that I think are back on YouTube or whatever. YouTube is the #1 spot. So we, in the next few months, probably 2025, we're going to be chopping up all of these live streams that I do for you guys every week and putting those into YouTube as their own individual story feeds and kind of see what happens. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble. Don just got the Facebook notification. Yeah, this is kind of cool. Kind of cool. 10, just checking out the numbers. 42 seconds. We're going to be going live, ladies and gentlemen. Uh-oh. I hear my awesome wife coming up. Is that for me? Okay, thanks, babe.
Sure.
I have just enough time to pour myself a little beverage. A slight beverage that I will imbibe with as I read for you guys. And holy crap, does that look hot? Let's be very careful here. Fantastic. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get into our story this week. And here we go. The Sixth Day of Deer Camp, Part 2. Previously on the Days of Deer Camp. George, Toivo, Bernie, and Mr. Ekela were enjoying their annual hunting retreat in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. The world changed that day when an alien invasion destroyed many major cities around the world. For reasons unknown, one of those alien ships crashed in the deep woods around the hunting cabin. Facing 30 below weather and armed with only hunting rifles, George and the others set out to find that ship. They discovered that the crashed ship was far from defenseless. A 15-foot-tall alien robot stormed out of the dark. A 15-foot-tall alien robot stormed out of the dark nighttime woods and blew up the hunting cabin. Toivo called for everyone to shoot that robot on a count of 3. When part 1 ended, Toivo had just finished that count. And now, the 6th day of deer camp, part 2. Movement all around. George's friends rising up, the crack of rifles followed by the sound of bolts sliding back, then forward again. George ripped off his gloves, held the rifle tight as he rose to his knees and turned, all one uncoordinated, lurching movement. He swung the barrel of his Remington 700 over the top of the log, knocking aside clumps of snow. The hand cupping the forestock pressed down on the log, snow instantly melting from the heat of his skin. The big machine turned sharply, swiveling at the hips like the turret of a tank, swiveling in a herky-jerky, halting fashion. George fired instantly, without aiming, had no idea if he'd hit. Gunshots from his left and from his right. He popped the rifle's lever up and pulled it back, heard the faint ring of the ejected shell, shoved the bolt back, but it stuck. His hand slipped off, lurching him forward into the log. The guns kept firing. I've never even shot a deer. What the hell am I doing? I should have gone to the range more. I should have... George slammed the bolt home. The sound of it locking into place seemed to slow time from a mad explosion of a volcano to the slow creep of the lava flow. He looked through his scope at the 15-foot-tall machine only 20 feet away, sighted through one of the tears in the shell at the yellowish form inside. He pulled the trigger. The Remington jumped. He saw the yellow thing inside twitch, then fall still. It didn't move. Neither did the machine. "Stop firing," he shouted. The rifle reports ended like someone had unplugged a TV in the middle of an action movie. No gunshot echoes, not with the snow-covered trees eating up all sound save for the wind. George stared. They all stared. No one knew what else to do. Slowly, like a top-heavy bookshelf with one too many knickknacks, the thing tipped forward. 15 feet of alien machine arced down and slammed into the ground with a billowing woof of snow. The top of it was only 5 feet away. They stared at it. It didn't move. Somewhere under there, hidden by all that bulk, was the alien who had been driving it. Holy shit, Holy shit, Jocko said. I think we killed it. George hoped so. He looked to his right, to the cabin, or what was left of it. Shattered, destroyed, blown apart with such force that there were only a few stumps of broken wood and a snow-free patch marking the place he and his friends had come every year for almost 3 decades. Told you bullets would kill it, Toivo said. Who's the physicist now? The wind kept howling. The wind didn't care. Guys, Bernie said, we gotta get moving. I'm freezing, eh? Those words might as well have been boiling oil thrown on George's hands. The cold smashed them, ground his fingers. He set the gun against the log, almost fumbled it in the process, then grabbed his gloves out of the snow and pulled them on, only to find snow had somehow gotten inside of them. His gloves were wet. Wet inside. It's getting colder, Arnold said. How the fuck can it get any colder? The old man started to cough. He bent at the knees, then fell to them, his body shaking. Bernie knelt next to him, holding him close. He looked up at George. We got to get Dad inside. Jocko pointed to where the cabin had been. Inside where, Bernie? There is no more inside. Bernie shouted back at him. Then build a fucking lean-to or something. Start a fire. Jocko slung his rifle. Build a lean-to? I don't have that merit badge, eh? The two began arguing. Jocko about how they might as well start walking, and Bernie how they couldn't, how they had to find a way to help Arnold. Jocko didn't say the words. He couldn't, none of them could, but he was making a case for heartbreak. If they started moving, they had a chance, even if that meant Arnold did not. George took off his wet gloves, stuffed them into his snowsuit. His hands, brittle as glass, searched his pockets. He wasn't going to last long out here. None of them would. Toivo pointed to the woods, to the red, green, and blue beams filtering through the trees, beams that colorized the driving snow. "There is someone inside," he said. "The only one we got." Bernie and Jocko stopped arguing. "Well, shit," Jocko said. Bernie pulled his trembling father tighter and nodded. "Toivo's right," he said. "It's that or Dad dies." "That or," George said, his jaw betraying him, suddenly clacking his teeth together so rapidly the words wouldn't come. He clenched, fought down the shivering long enough to say 5 more words. "That or we all die." As far as choices went, this one sucked as much as any choice possibly could. "I can't believe we got this close," Toivo said. "I expected to be dead already, eh? Ain't they got no more machines?" He stood on George's right, rifle held in gloved hands. George wanted those gloves, needed them, or needed something to dry his own out. His fingers were going numb. The stinging had stopped, which meant frostbite was setting in. He had little strength left. All the men were exhausted, drained from the fight and the long walk through the woods to the crashed ship. If another machine came, George knew they were done for. At this point, he wasn't even sure if he had the will to fight again. The ship wasn't as big as they had thought, but it was big enough. It had come down hard, gouging a long, 50-foot wide trench through the pines as if God had reached down an invisible stick and dragged a straight line through the woods, snapping trees into kindling, kicking out a wake of ice and frozen dirt. And the ship itself. George hadn't known what to expect, what an alien ship was supposed to look like. A disc. Nothing more than a classic flying saucer, really. Or at least it probably had been before the crash. The front end was smashed and torn, far worse even than the machine that had blown up the cabin. This thing had hit hard, the front edge digging into the ground almost like a shovel, so deep that the back end had probably tilted up behind it as it slid along the ground, grinding out that wide trench. It might have even flipped over during the crash, maybe even more than once. George actually had no idea if he was looking at the front or the back, or if the disc even had a front. There, a hole, ragged in some places, smooth and somewhat melted in others. Someone or something, maybe that alien, someone or something, maybe that alien in its machine they'd left behind, had cut its way out. George pointed at the hole. "That's got to be the door," he said. His frozen lips, almost as numb as his fingers, were barely able to form the words. "Jocko, does that look like a door to you?" Jocko was on George's left, rifle barrel pointed forward and down. Of all the friends, little Jocko, for reasons George couldn't explain, now looked the most like a soldier. Hard eyes peering out from above a blue, snow-slick scarf wrapped around his mouth and nose, his weapon at the ready. "I don't know, Georgie. I ain't got that merit badge either," If it is the door, I'm guessing it's an afterthought. It doesn't matter, said Bernie from behind him. Whatever it is, we gotta go in. George turned, looked back. Bernie was behind them, one arm under his father's shoulder. Arnold's head hung down. George didn't know if the old man was conscious anymore. We have to, Bernie said. His eyes pleaded for understanding. He knew what he was asking of his friends. George did not want to go in. He loved Mr. Ekela, truly and deeply, but he had children of his own. Was Mr. Ekela's life more important than George getting back to his boys? George glanced at Jocko. Jocko had been the first to think of leaving, to saying without saying that Arnold was old, that he had already had his time on this world. In that glance, George suddenly and shamefully hoped Jocko would say, "Let's get out of here." And George could pretend to be upset, but actually back Jocko's play. And they would leave and not go into that ruined ship, and it wouldn't be George's fault. Not really. Jocko glanced at the opening. "Fuck it," he said. "My dick's freezing off. Fuck it." He didn't wait for anyone to answer him. He pointed his hunting rifle ahead and walked to the opening of the ruined ship. George had a moment to hate Jocko, hate him very much. Then he followed, Toivo just a step behind. There were bodies everywhere. The first few were so mangled, George had no idea what the aliens looked like pre-crash. The yellow color he'd seen in the walking machine, it turned out, was probably clothing, because the twisted limbs and scraps of pulverized flesh showed various hues of blue. He saw what had to be hands, though they looked like they had 2 thumbs and 1 finger, and what had to be arms, connected to the hands, obviously, but long and thin, the arms of a death camp victim in those Holocaust documentaries. He also saw enough biological wreckage to identify legs, stick-thin but not so different from his own. Hips, a midsection with what might be vital organs in a bulge on the back rather than in front, for those that still had vital organs at least. And an endless amount of sticky, clear fluid. "They're blood," Jocko said. "It's got no color." His face was ashen, his upper lip curled back in revulsion. Jocko had removed his scarf because it was warm inside this ship. Borderline hot, even. It was such a welcome relief from the numbing cold that it almost deadened the shock of being there, in the strange ship, surrounded by dead aliens. If there were any of them left alive, they weren't showing themselves. George and the others moved through the ship, finding its familiarity almost disturbing. Even for a different species, a room was a room. A hallway was a hallway. Everything was bent and broken, cracked, twisted from the impact. But maybe it didn't look all that different from what humans might someday make. The doors were heavy, like something from a battleship. When Arnold could go no further, they stopped in the largest room they found. Ironically, the room was about the same size as the cabin. Bernie cleared a space of debris, then laid Arnold down. One of Bernie's sweaters, rolled up, served as a pillow. Arnold already looked better. He was still shivering, but some color had returned to his face. He nodded at whatever Bernie was saying. "Georgie," Toivo said, "come take a look at this." Toivo was on the other side of the wreckage-filled room. George stepped over broken and fallen bits, careful to watch where he put his feet. Toivo's eyes flicked in all directions, at the damaged ship, at the body parts scattered across the floor, walls, and ceiling. His hand, however, was pressed against what looked like a door sealed with a heavy wheel, like something from a submarine. Find something, Toivo? The man nodded. Sorta. He made a fist, rapped on the door, knock, knock, the ring of knuckles on metal. Then he moved his fist 2 inches to the left and rapped again. Kun kun this time, 2 dull thuds. George leaned closer. The door had been painted over, repeatedly. It was uneven, lumpy in parts. It's Bondo, Toivo said. Well, not, Bondo, but you know what I mean. It's spackle, a patch job, and from way before the crash. He pointed up to the left, down and to the right. It's all over, Georgie. Looks like repairs and a lot of them. This ship, it's a beater, eh? What did that mean? This ship, this alien ship, something that was the very icon of actual life on other planets, was akin to a used car? Could that be why it had crashed? Had something broken at the wrong time? A beater, I tell ya, Toivo said. He rapped on the door again. Knock, knock, knock. The door opened. No screech of hinges. No sound. It just swung inward. The heat seemed to vanish. George was cold once again, frozen in place, motionless. Inside the door, a short creature that had all the bits and pieces he'd seen scattered about the ship, but smaller. All that gore pressed back together into a tiny shape of stick-thin limbs and black eyes. 3 eyes, not 2, in a big head. Too big for the body, and Toivo fired. Toivo fired, the barrel only inches from the big head. The head blew apart in a clear water balloon splatter that splashed goop on George's face. The creature dropped instantly, a lifeless sack of meat, a puppet cut free from the supporting strings. Toivo slid back the bolt, a metallic sound that seemed just as loud as the gunshot itself. As he pushed it forward, what lay beyond the door came into sudden clarity. The bolt slid forward, ratcheted into place, and the barrel came up for another shot. George's hand snapped out, grabbed the barrel, raised it up just as Toivo fired. The round went somewhere in the ceiling. Georgie, what are you doing? Stop! Just stop! George was aware of the heat on his hand, where he had grabbed the barrel, but distantly, because his brain was busy processing what he saw. This room, not as beat up as everything else. Heavy, curving girders running from floor to ceiling, and between them what could only be crash seats of some kind, with heavy reinforced doors and thick padding visible behind thick windows. All of this, yes, all of it registering for him, but distant, like the heat on his hand, because in the middle of the room stood a dozen creatures, most smaller than the one Toivo had just killed. Some so small they wouldn't have come up to George's knee, all clinging together in a trembling pile, black eyes, black alien eyes, not human, not at all, but fear is fear, just like a hallway is a hallway, wide open and staring. They're kids, George said. Fucking Jesus. Kids. Children. The aliens had put their children in the ship's safest room, perhaps as soon as trouble started. Goddamn car seats, George thought. Alien spaceship car seats. They strapped him in, safe and sound, as snug as a bug in a rug. Same things I would have done with my boys. Georgie, let go of the gun, Toivo said. Same as I would have done, George said. Same. Toivo yanked the rifle barrel free, almost pulled George off balance in the process. Was he going to shoot another one? George positioned himself between Toivo and the door, blocking Toivo's line of sight to the aliens. George tried to close the door, but the dead body blocked it. He reached down, grabbed the bone-thin little arm and dragged the body into the corridor. He stood and again put his hand on the door to push it shut, but before he did, he glanced into the room. The little creatures were watching him, their black eyes wide with palpable horror. He knew what they had seen, how they had perceived it. An alien, because to them that's exactly what he was, pulling their dead friend away, leaving a streak of wetness behind, then sealing them in. George again tried to close the door. This time, it was Toivo who stopped it from shutting. Toivo stared at him. "Georgie, are you nuts? We gotta kill him." "No, we don't." "They're bombing cities," Toivo said. "Killing thousands, maybe millions." George heard this. He nodded. "The ones in the room aren't doing it," he said. "They didn't do anything." Toivo sneered in disgust, then tried to push the door open. George blocked it with his shoulder. The two childhood friends locked eyes. Toivo seemed to study George for a moment, as if measuring the man's will. Then Toivo shook his head. "I'll go back and check on Mr. Ekala," he said. Toivo walked to Bernie and Arnold. George saw those two looking back. Jocko as well. No one knew what to do, what to think, so they all just stared. George could not meet their gaze. Kids. Children. This ship, old and repaired and beat up. Adults dead all over the place. But the kids? Safe and sound. Had the one in the walking machine blown up the cabin just to kill, or was it trying to eliminate any threat to these little ones? Why? Was that why the ship had come in the first place? To make a new home? George didn't know. He didn't have any answers. All he could think about was what it would be like if a skinny-limbed alien had kicked in the door to his boys' bedroom, aimed a weapon at their faces, shot one of them, dropped him like a bag of meat and bones while the other boy watched, helpless to defend himself. How horrible would that be? How life-shattering, how soul-rending. Toivo was right. Before the phone stopped working, George had read the news. The aliens were killing people. Thousands, maybe millions. But there were billions of people. Billions that would fight back and kill the aliens. But not these ones, George said to no one at all. They didn't do anything. They're just kids. He pulled the door tight. Hands on the wheel, he leaned back, making sure the door had a good seal, then turned it until he heard something click home inside. "Just kids," he said. "Just kids." He could protect them, but only because they were in the middle of nowhere, only because the 4 people nearby were George's childhood friends. And even then, he wasn't sure. If Toivo, Jocko, and Bernie all insisted on opening that door and shooting whatever they saw inside, how far was George willing to go to prevent that? Would a stranger have even let him shut that door? What if there had been 10 strangers? What if it had been 100? If a ship like this crashed or came down near a destroyed city, human survivors would kill any alien they saw. Adult or child, it didn't matter. The first chance they got. Humanity would win. George felt that in his core. He knew it at a base level, just as his body knew how to breathe, just as his heart knew how to beat. Humanity would win because those billions of survivors would fight back. And there were millions of guns out there for them to use. Bullets did the same thing to aliens that they did to people. Even if all the cities were destroyed, humanity would win. Too many people, too many guns, and knives, and clubs, and rocks, and fists. The aliens had attacked, had announced themselves with violence and death. People would be only too happy to return that greeting in kind. George envisioned instant mob scenes, aliens torn to pieces by enraged people. There would be no reasoning with these mobs. How do you appeal to a person's humanity when the target isn't human? Too many people, too many guns. When this was over, would the alien children behind that door be the only ones left? George tightened the wheel on the door, made doubly sure it was as shut as it could be. He didn't want it opening on its own. And he prayed the little creatures inside wouldn't open it, wouldn't come walking out, because judging by the looks on the faces of his friends, the only way George would be able to stop them was by taking the bullets himself. Just kids, he mumbled. Just kids. George walked over to join his friends. There you go. That is it for the 6th week of Deer Camp. And then next episode, we'll do the 7th week of Deer Camp, which is a lot less action and much more philosophical in George's approach to what goes on with these surviving kids. But cheers to all of you. Happy Thursday to you. Happy Thursday to you. Happy Thursday to you. My incredibly awesome, fantastic, gorgeous, splendiferous wife is going to shake her booty on up here any moment now. And we will all hang out with you guys. We're going to talk about books and stuff. All right, guys. The reason this story is so weird is because it was 3 stories in 3 separate books called the Apocalypse Triptych. And the goal was the first story, The End is Nigh, or the first book's called The End of Nigh. The first story was kind of set up that apocalyptic thing. And then the second story, The End is Here. Yeah, The End is Here, I think it's book 2. And that one was, okay, now let's see the apocalypse actually happening. And then the final book, in which the 7th week, the 7th day of Deer Camp, is The End is Now? I can't quite remember. But anyways, so then you have to do a post-apocalyptic version of the pre and active apocalyptic thing that went down. That's just how all that stuff was set up to happen. Hi, darling.
Hiya.
How are you?
Good.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's go to Maine. Oops. Schwarming to switch cameras. Oh, what kind of hat do you have on there, A. Sigler?
The new Kraken's hat.
Is that a new Kraken's hat, A. Sigler? I did not know you were going to wear that. I am so surprised.
This is him being surprised. I have a giant and very round head.
Hold on, Bubba. Boom. Boom. There you go. A likes to call her head a Charlie Brown head.
Oh, okay, but it's so very round.
Okay, baby, can you hear okay?
Yeah, I can use a little more in my ears.
Copy. Coming right up. Okay, that's cranked up pretty good.
All right, that sounds good to me.
And then let's make sure our microphones are
see,
pointed away
doesn't
from each other to try and help Steve. Steve Iceberg Ricky Brewery had to bail our asses out last week.
It's true. He did a great job.
He did a great job. Oh, here we go.
There we go.
Why are you trying to hog all the camera time? What's up?
It's because of my new hat.
Sparkly new hat. Speaking of hats,
It's
let's go
actually-
ahead and go
I think-
to...
Maybe meant for your head. The duckbill is kind of crazy.
Do I have this right? Yep, there we go. So we're going to... If these are the newest things over at scottsigler.com/store, I just put these in the store. We have the Kraken's beanie for $16. And it is quite toasty and warm. And I got my modeling going on. Look at that picture up there.
Yeah, I
That's all
know. I
fancy.
saw. You want to
Fancy.
You show it to the people?
Oh,
Well, you don't even have to put it on. You could
I'll
have just
put it
showed it. Oh, okay.
so we got that right there. And then,
Can I go back to Maine for a second?
yeah. And then we also have, I got to go back to, I did not set this up right. Boom. And then we also have this wonderful thing right there. I also got my modeling going on for that one too.
I love that you're wearing
It's
a Sigler hat and a Sigler t-shirt.
My little Bon Vivant. Tip of the hat to you, sir.
Top of the morning
Top
to
of
you.
the morning to you. And those, are, of course, are all available at scottsigler.com/store. Let me get these hats off because it's hot in here now. Whoo! All right, going back to Maine. Hello, everyone.
Hello
Now,
again.
we're going to go through. Hold on a sec, baby. Lovely. Cheers, everyone.
Oh.
Here's to another week almost done.
Cheers.
Okay.
Rolling into the holiday season in the United States next week.
Rolling. All right, let's go through our, what do I call it? Housekeeping. We're going to go through our housekeeping, and then we're going to have this lovely talk about where you also stick around, you guys. We want to hear how you find your recommendations for books. It's very, very important to us. As I mentioned before, we have my cousin apparently has a brand new evil sermon to speak during this show. It's a live stream.
I have to run downstairs and get my list. I'll be right back.
Okay, she can get her list. So mark that down on your calendars. That is coming up December 5th. It would be really fun for the band if they had some people in the chat room. And that is going to be live. That might be your only chance ever to see Super Weapon play live. So do check that out. And then we did the new hats for sale in store. I'm working on the Crypt book. Let's go back to me. My camera, ladies and gentlemen. I'm working on the Crypt book 2. I've added 2,614 words so far. My goal was to cut 1,000 words at this point. It's not working out. I'm about 17% through the second draft. Don't know when that will be done, but it's starting to gel and the things are starting to come together. So hopefully you'll have that very, very soon. Warpath is done. Don't know when that's going to be out. I don't even know if it will be out. It's a really weird situation. Sunday, November 17th, the 6th day of Deer Camp Part 1 went live in the feed. Tuesday, November 19th, Deep Cuts 25, Scott's Research Horror Stories went live in the feed. That's when we were talking about where Steve the Iceberg, Ricky Berg bailed us out. And then Sunday, November 25th, tonight's episode goes live in the podcast feed. If you're not subscribed to the podcast, you want to go do that at scottsigler.com/subscribe. We've got links to Spotify, iTunes, and other places there. And Wednesday, November 28th, right back here, we'll be back live for the 7th day of Deer Camp to conclude the Deer Camp stories. Are there any deep cut subjects you guys would like to hear? Let us know in the chat. We'll be watching. We don't have one planned for next week yet. Maybe we'll get an idea from you guys and we'll go from there. And then, of course, Saturday, where'd it go? Gosh darn it. Oh, Saturday, December 8th, that will be, do I have that right?
It's 2 weeks from now, I think.
Is it December 8th? But the first Saturday's got to be, I must screw it up. 7th. Saturday, December 7th. There will be the Junkie Party. You can come out and hang out with your fellow junkies from all over the globe. All over the globe, they come and they bring the forces together in the name of Sigla. I see Rob Tenerella's in there. Rob is seeing Gladiator 2 Fantastic. A and I are seeing it on Tuesday. I'm super excited. I'm really looking forward to that quite a bit. Let's go through the other basics. If you have things you want to know, things you want us to know, email, just set it over there. Email that to info@emptyset.com. You should be signed up for our text number. We're closing in on 1,000 people on this. Just text SIGTEXT to 855-955-5095. You get 10% off on purchase. You could get both of those hats for 10% off. It's crazy. So how do we stay in business?
Well, there is also right now a coupon code, which you can't combine them. You can choose one or the other. So you should save your sign-up one.
Yeah.
And use Black Friday because Black Friday is 15%.
Oh, Black Friday. The code
through the
Black Friday. BLACKFRIDAY.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And then, of course, we're going to get newsletters out here. I don't know what I did with the, looks like I screwed something up. But scottsigler.com/newsletter. Those are the best ways to stay in touch with us. And it's important because Facebook continues to squash it down. Everybody used to be able to know what's going on with the things you want to know about on Facebook. And now all they do is they just want to hide stuff. It's getting worse and worse and worse. We also have the Discord server going. Steve the Iceberg, Ricky Berg manages a lot of that too. So if you're a Discord user, sign up at scottsigler.com/Discord and you will be good. And I do most of my social media right now at Threads. Although I don't do a lot of social media in the past few weeks. Kind of out of it. So there we go. David Lamb says, when Scott says he trims 1,000 words from a story, are those permanently discarded or are they saved for possible inclusion in a future volume or story? About 80% of the time, they're just trashed. They get put into kind of a little keeper bin, you might say, in the story itself.
I will start by saying they are not immediately deleted, but I don't know how often they get back into other things. You don't actually just delete things. If you're cutting out whole sections, don't you just put them non-compilable?
Yeah, I put them non-compilable, and then because I'm trying to keep track of how many words the thing is, so even though they're not compiled, they can't be in there because of the way the program I use calculates. So if I want to see how many words I've got in a certain section, all of those not to be used segments or to be used later segments have to go into another folder outside of those folders. It's a little cumbersome to explain it, but yes, I keep all of that stuff in case I get a chance to come back and use it somewhere else because it's already done. Let's see if I can pop it back in somewhere.
Yeah. And that does every once in a while, as you're formulating a draft, an editable, reviewable draft, sometimes they come in and out and move too, right? That's part of why you love the Scrivener.
Yeah, I can move things around, and several times I have cut from the first draft, I cut things and I've already gone and found those cut things and brought them back into the second draft. I'm like, oh, I have the part, right, this will fit right there. Right there. And the only problem with that is eventually by the third draft, by the final draft, sometimes I don't remember what's in the book and what isn't in the book. Because I'm like, oh, I explained this.
Yeah.
And like John found that, John Viscara, Continuity Czar, found that when he went through. He's like, yeah, you did this whole thing about a promotion and now this person is this rank and you didn't actually promote them in the last book. I'm like, I know I did. We cut it, but I forgot about it. All right, babe, you ready to get rolling into this?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I do think, though, we'll talk about it a little bit more,
Let's
but I'm
do this.
pretty
So
sure.
you don't have
Thank
to
you.
quite come around. That's fine. Yeah, it sounds great.
I'm pretty sure that next week, since it is Wednesday of next week and Thursday of next week is the Thanksgiving holiday in the U.S., I think we're going to be talking about traditions around the holidays. So if you guys have any traditions you want to share, especially if it's a little bit, you're not going to see it in a Hallmark movie kind of thing, send it to info@emptyset and we'll talk about it next week because everybody's going to be cooking and prepping if you're in the United States for Thanksgiving the next day. And this way you can just listen. You don't even need to watch a lot. We'll hopefully regale you with fun holiday traditions.
Hopefully. Plus, turkey's coming, which means turkey sandwiches. Which I'm a big turkey sandwich on toasted potato bread.
We only have potato bread in the house one time a year, which is this time of year, because otherwise he'll eat it all too quickly. But he needs it for the turkey leftovers.
Cobalt forgot about the coupon
Hey,
code.
Cobalt, did you just purchase that? If you just purchased that or you purchased it in the last couple of days, go ahead and email me and I'll see if I can set that right.
It's info@emptyset, bro. Email info@emptyset. We'll try and help you out with that. Chris Carl says, how about a deep cuts and how Scott uses Scrivener in the writing editing process? That's a very good idea, but I think the prep work for that would would take half a day to a full day. So we'll have to keep that in mind because I have to be able to show you all that stuff. So I have to figure out, so much of it is muscle memory now.
Mm-hmm.
I just did the hands and just do it. I don't think about it anymore. I have to come back and figure out, okay, I have to explain all of this different stuff in screenshots, but not a bad idea. Not a bad idea.
If you can, let me know if you just made that order just now, because I do see an order, but I don't want to give any of your personal information away. And I can't just say, what did you order? Because more than one order is in there.
All right. Okay, let's get into it. Great, here we go. We're about to do our deep cuts thing. Mm-hmm. Once again, we're now rolling into deep cuts. This is bonus episode stuff. If you got to tap out, now is the time to do it. But you can catch the conversation Aaron are about to have in the podcast feed, which you can subscribe at scottsigler.com/subscribe, which includes links for Spotify, Apple Podcast. I already said all that shit. Isn't it weird? I'm repeating myself. Okay, Dolly Ray said that. Oh, no, hold on. I forgot a very important part. Vamp. That's you, Vamp.
Oh, I'm vamping. Sorry.
Yes.
I'm apparently not vamping. Today has been a crazy day. Our car battery died, so we had to have AAA come out and help us replace the car battery. But it died right when I was on my way to get my hair cut. Mm-hmm. So I borrowed a neighbor's car, which was super convenient and fun because I got to go there. And then I walked out of the hair salon an hour and a half later and thought someone had stolen my car. Because I forgot that I had borrowed my neighbor's car to get to my haircut appointment.
Let's go ahead and first you got to save this so it goes to the right place. Daily work file. This would be deep cuts 20. I forgot this part.
So going back to if you guys are in the United States and you want to talk about Thanksgiving, that's great. If you're Canadian, if you're anywhere in the world and you want to share stories about whatever holiday traditions you have, that's fine with me. Are you ready to go?
Should we do that for a deep cut? Should people email us all their favorite things?
Yeah, that's what I said.
You just literally the words just came out of your mouth.
Absolutely, the words I just said.
I was busy doing technical stuff.
I know.
It's not my fault. We're actually recording right now, so we're going to dive right in. You ready?
Sounds good.
Here we go. Oops. Did you set the timer?
I did not.
Reset it or reset it.
Okay.
Say when.
When?
We are inundated with ads and social media and messaging We are inundated with ads and social media and messaging of all kinds these days, which begs the question, where do people get their book recommendations these days? What makes a reader decide to buy a book?
We're going to talk about that and we're going to talk about that with our live stream audience of book readers right now after this quick break.
Cool. All right. Here we go. Welcome to Deep Cuts, the bonus episode of the Scott Sigler Slices Fiction Podcast, where a sci-fi author and an audiobook narrator discuss things and stuff in the world of writing and content creation. I am Scott Sigler, sci-fi horror author, known far and wide as the future Dark Overlord.
And I am A.B. Sigler, audiobook narrator and publisher here at Empty Set Entertainment. And on this Deep Cuts, we're talking with readers about where they get their books, recommendations for books, and what makes them buy a book.
Bonus reminder, this is a bonus episode, not part of any particular tale. So you don't need to listen to this to know what's going on in the story that's going on right now, but we love to have you. Let's get rolling.
Yeah, let's. This is for me, such an interesting topic because it's already been brought up in the live stream chat room. Not only where I get recommendations and create a to be read list has changed over the years, but also the format that I am willing to read books in. Back in the day, it used to be I would read nonfiction books as a tree book, and I would have a fiction or nonfiction kind of ebook, and then I'd have a pulpy audiobook, like something that I didn't need to pay attention to. And now, just like Michael Moore in the chat room said, I almost exclusively listen to audiobooks.
Yeah, me too.
I do, if it's a nonfiction book, I still like to have a physical copy of it, but more and more, a lot of the things that I need to be able to visualize are in an included PDF that I get when I download the book.
Okay.
So
okay.
It's a little kludgier to use, but it kind of works in a pinch.
I get most of my book recommendations from other authors. Most of my reading is books by authors that I have met, at conventions or pretty much wherever, or just met them online. And I always strive to read at least one book from each author I'm interacting with, but there's so many authors I usually don't have time. And then every now and then, one of those authors' first books in a series will catch fire, and I'll read through that whole series, then sometimes through their entire catalog. Every now and then, I go out to the junkies on Facebook, the Sigler Junkies on Facebook. I'm like, hey, I'm looking for this kind of a book. Anybody got any recommendations? And I'll get a lot of recommendations that way. For me, the final one is things will pop up in Audible. Like if you like if you like this, you will like this, and like that looks very good. Sorry, that was not the final one. The final one is I've been reading a lot more nonfiction because of my military advisors who help out with the Crypt and other books, and they frequently will post like, here's this amazing book about the Pacific Fleet battle in World War II. So that's where I get mine mostly from. It's all from friends. It's all from acquaintances. It's from fellow authors, or it is from my advisors.
I am absolutely the opposite of you.
Okay.
I do a whole bunch of looking online, which is different than getting recommendations from social media. Not that doesn't sometimes work. Sometimes it does. I had a friend from ages and ages and ages ago when I lived in Nashville, who I never interact with anymore. But something came up on social media the other day. I can't remember the name of the book, but whatever it is, it's apparently very difficult and boring to get through. And it's not like War and Peace, but it's something sort of sloggy like that. And she was super proud of it. And I was like, I don't think I've ever heard of this book. But what then I do is over the years, I used to love Bookseer. Bookseer was, you could go there, say what you last read, what you are reading, what you'd like to be reading, what type of things you like right now. And it would give you similar but a little different. But they're out of business now. But I think Book Riot especially, and I love Book Riot for like non-genre recommendations.
Okay.
And I agree. I will agree with you with this one spot for authors that I love, and they're an automatic purchase. And Beth Copenhaver in the live stream chat talked about this. That if there are people that I will buy the book, pre-order the book, but they're very few of them. I think there might be 5 people, and then everything else I have to look and see what people I don't know think about it, and then go to my Goodreads and see what people I kind of know think about it, and then see if any of my friends have read it.
Short answer to this question. You go look at user reviews of a book written by people you don't know. Does that influence your decision?
Yes.
Okay, great. That's very well. In the chat room, if you do that, do you go look at user reviews for a book? If so, does that influence your decision to buy that book or not? Michael Moore in the chat room says, I love stories and have read many books, almost totally audiobooks now. Wife does only paperback or hardcover. And I got to tell you, I miss the days of going to the bookstore, dropping $100, walking out with these beautiful, brand new, undented, wonderful smelling books.
Yeah.
We simply just don't have space for those books anymore.
Yeah, right
so
now
if
we
we
don't
got
have the
them,
room.
we'd get rid of them.
Yeah.
The books I did keep, some of them I carried around for 20 years and never opened again. And now that's one reason I don't buy physical books that much anymore unless I'm at an author event. But the attention span is also huge for me. I can't sit down with a print book. It's really difficult for me to actually read.
Yeah, I think part of that is you also, you don't even sit down and watch football during football season and exclusively watch football and shout at the TV and eat food. He's multitasking then too. So I also think there's a little bit of training that we had somehow, which I'm going to guess is from schooling, that as we got older and audiobooks became more prevalent, we could just be listening and getting something else done. And I think that has taken away my ability to sit down and read a book.
I can't relax anymore. I can't do it.
Yeah, because you sort of feel a little bit itchy. I will say recently, several things have changed. And I mean very recently. We have Audible subscriptions. And now Audible, after you finish a book, will serve up a little sample of something you also might like. And it's not even a month new, I don't think. But
That's
they
cool.
seem, except so far, they seem completely irrelevant to what I was just listening to.
Okay.
So you would think that if I was just reading a murder mystery, it would be a murder mystery, or at least it would be an adult novel.
That makes sense. That's logical.
Novel.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And like I said, it's pretty new. So for me, I was like, the last book I finished was a murder mystery that was definitely written for adults, and I got not a kid's book, but a YA book as a recommendation, which I was like, why would you think so?
Don't know. In the chat room, Mary Garrett says, used to get my book recommendations from Entertainment Weekly magazine. Now that's not around anymore. Now she gets them usually from podcasts, research materials, or books that are the original material for movies and TV. So Mary Garrett will see something on TV. Here's that, for example, we'll talk about Silo, which is based on Wool by Hugh Howey. You see Silo, you find it's written by Hugh Howey, and then you go out and get that source material to read that, then come back and watch it. Anybody else in the chat room, that's how you do things, that's very interesting. I've done that to some extent with the video game movies. Like, see a video game, I'm like, I don't know what that's all about. I'm going to go play that game and see how it goes. Haven't done a lot lately, but yeah. So the adaptation is the thing that can drive some people to source material.
And I will say there's a couple of things about that. That's a totally great point. I used to love recommendations from Entertainment Weekly, and also all the little what's hot sections of like Us magazine and People magazine, and I'm pretty sure People still exist, but I'm not sure if the others do. So there's that. Plus, also one of my very favorite novels ever in my top 3 was made into a movie. I was so excited about it.
I took you to that movie.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
It was directed by Ang Lee. Should have been an Oscar winner. Was a great novel, and it was the 2 things that I could tell you that were the same about the book were names and the fact that the protagonist was a publisher.
Okay.
That book is like 500 pages long. It's called A Winter's Tale by Mark Halperin.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't know that a peace sign would do that too. And that I'm not exaggerating at all. The only 2 things that were similar about the book that I loved my entire life since I was 15 and the movie I saw in my 40s was they used some of the character names and the main character was a publisher. And that's it. It's insane. I was so mad about that. I never want somebody to get a book recommendation from a movie again, even though I do the same thing.
Yeah. Recluse Mage in chat room says, book recommendations. I'm more interested when I hear from others I trust on social media, and especially from authors themselves. So I have an all or nothing policy as an author. If I read another person's work, if I can't give it a 5-star, I just don't talk about it at all.
For sure.
If there's something about that book, like that didn't sit well with me, I didn't, it's like, it's okay. I can tell that's not for me sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
This book is written for people who are not like me, don't have my taste. It's a very good book. I leave all of that alone. If it's a book I actually like Good Dogs, which we are by Brian Asman, which is we're talking about in the chat room, I then will talk about it online, share the cover, say this was great. I enjoyed this quite a bit. And Recluse Mage gets book recommendations from authors like me.
Yeah, and I think that that's a fair point. I have that same thing you mentioned, plus also what Recluse Mage just mentioned. If there's an author who I read and I like, and that, again, hasn't happened very often, but I've gone through the entire catalog of maybe 8 or 9 writers.
Mm-hmm.
If they are recommending something, I will check it out. I find that I apply that if I read one and I like it, I will go get another book by that person, even if there's not a series.
Okay.
And if there's not a series, I just do the same, or I guess even if there is, I do the same process every time. Like, okay, I'll start book 2 in this series. If book 2 is really hard for me to get through or problematic or the writing has fallen off or whatever, I will be possibly likely to buy an audiobook and a 2-for-1 deal for book 3, but I might be done.
Yeah.
But if I get through everything that they've written, I will start that same process with anybody they recommend.
And I think for me, it's the personal stress of trying to get to everyone I meet, especially people who are, with a mid-list or a big publisher, people I come across, or people are trying to emulate, whether consciously or not, emulate our business model of like being forward with the content, social media, then sell the book. I want to try and get to everybody and spread my particular bit of sunshine all over the place. For example, I read the Temporary series by Naomi Novik.
You loved it.
Was on a panel with her, read book 1 of the Temporary series, and just tore through the entire thing on Audible. And I have not read a book of hers since, right? Because there's that, okay, well now that's 9 books. Now I got to go make sure I'm reading other people and try and, do what I can to spread the word about these other creators. And the counter to that is Joe Abercrombie.
Yeah.
Joe Abercrombie also, I don't know if I did meet him once at a con, I think at a Dragon Con, and I can't remember if I'd started reading him before or not, but that is one of those authors that no matter what comes out,
Yep.
I am getting that book and I am sequestering time for myself to not be bothered. I am with my new Joe Abercrombie. So it kind of works both ways for me.
I want to point out another thing. Several people have mentioned podcasts. We have a friend who's been on this show. Her name is Mallory O'Meara. And she and Brea Grant, the actress Brea Grant, have a podcast called Reading Glasses.
Yep.
And when I say their podcast is all about reading, it is all about reading. It is where to read, when to read, how to read, what to read.
Interesting.
Over and over and over again. They talk about if you're making a book nook where you're going to go read every day to give yourself dedicated space. This is just one small example. They go over all of that and say, okay, well, if you do it so that it looks like a Pinterest page, but it isn't comfortable to you, you won't go read there. Maybe your reading nook is sitting at a bar stool at the breakfast table or the breakfast counter in the kitchen, so that you can hang out with family, stuff like that. And I find their their recommendations that are not actually about books almost as interesting and relevant as their book recommendations.
Tyler Miller in the chat room says, I rarely find a book scrolling through the list on Audible. I get book recommendations from friends and family, but also podcasts as well, which A was just talking about. For example, purchase Good Dogs from watching Brian as a guest on this particular podcast.
Yeah,
very
for
cool.
sure.
Very cool. Okay, let's see. We got some more here. Tyler also follows up with, if I like an IP, I'll listen to a lot of their audiobooks. For me, Aliens books led by Phalanx, and then Earth led him to Phalanx, then Earth Core, Phalanx, my book Aliens, Phalanx, and then Earth Core, and then a deep dive into the Sigler verse. So yeah, that I've always, the strongest book recommendation for me as a reader has always been The first book I read by that author blew me out of the water.
Yep, for sure.
And those first impressions are absolutely critical. As a side note, that's why I spend so much time making a book and trying to make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. Because I know no matter what book it is, even if it's randomly book 3 in a series, people may stumble across that first. Everything's got to be right. It's got to be as good as it can be. All the nuts got to be screwed down. All the bolts got to be tightened. I need them to walk away from my work because they don't like the source material. Not because there's any laziness or problem or I just made up some Deus Machina or some shit like that. But if you get that first book and like Naomi Novik knocked it out of the park, that is like, okay, now you've got me. I'm going to keep going because every now and then there's so many different writers, so many different styles. Oh, pause. Steve, some asshole forgot to solo shit. Hold on. There we go. There's so many different writers and so many different styles. Eventually, as a reader in the chat room, back me up on this, you come across an author, you're like, I was breathless while I read this. And then you just read everything they did, which I did for like Stephen King's first 20 novels. Couldn't get enough.
And we'll be back right after this short break.
Good job, eh? Okay, so let's pick up.
I'm the
Sean?
same way. There are several that I...
Wait, are we back?
We are back.
I gotta do the back.
Sorry, right.
I gotta do the back. Back. Where's did I delete it? Oh, thanks, honey. Welcome back to Deep Cuts, where we talk about all the things in the world of fiction writing and audiobook narration.
We are talking tonight about where readers get their book recommendations, where they get their books, and what makes them want to buy a book.
There's a couple things going on in the chat room right now. I'm going to go through these pretty quick. Sean Dyer on Twitch says, I'll maybe skim the reviews, but that's if the synopsis doesn't give me enough to go on. Okay. David Lamb says, author blurbs and recommendations from favorite authors like Scott cause me to give a book a second look. That's very interesting because I get asked for blurbs all the time. I ask other authors for blurbs all the time. It seems to be this underlying pulse of book publishing, book promotion, and I don't always see where that actually comes into play. Chris Grawl says he's got print books from 20 years ago. Cobalt says, no time for a read. So Cobalt, if you can answer in the chat room, I assume you're an audiobook guy because
I think you might have
audiobooks,
mentioned that earlier.
is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so.
Because that's a huge factor right now in this world, which brings us to another, in this current world where there's all these demands on our time and all these entertainment options, it brings us to another part of book recommendations, the narrator.
Oh, for sure.
The
The
narrator.
narrator is important. I want to cover, we have, in the time that we have left, I definitely want to talk about narration.
Okay.
And I also want to talk about places to get free books, free classics, free things that are out of, like good places you can go and read thousands of free books that are not stealing from the author or stealing their IP or anything like that. So let's talk about narration because that's huge. Is there ever...
We'll come back for that and talk about Ryan Minto's point in the chat room too. Very interesting.
Have you ever started a book, the narrator was absolutely untenable, put the audiobook down and then read the book anyway?
I have not done that yet. There have been a handful of books I have put down because the audio was recorded so poorly or the bit rate was smashed so far down. Right now I'm trying really hard to listen to Neil Stephenson's The Diamond Age.
Mm-hmm.
And the narrators, she's delightful. She's fantastic. But the audio quality is so unbelievably bad. I don't know why they did this, that I'm like, I don't know if I can finish this because this sounds like it was recorded on a cassette, then recorded with a handheld mic onto another cassette, then recorded the handheld mic onto another cassette. And this is clearly an amazing book. It's brilliant. But it's also this big.
Is it older?
It's Neil Stephenson. It's probably 15 years old.
Yeah. So I wonder if it was from like books on tape era.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is one factor. Audio quality, but the audiobook narrator, like Scott Brick and other narrators of that caliber, people, honestly, there are people who don't give a shit. They just want to hear Ray Porter read them a story. They don't give a fuck what the content is.
And I have, I've mentioned this on Deep Cuts before, or on this live stream before. We personally know Ray Porter now since we've worked with him for so long, and I ended up spending a week recording a book in a studio where he was recording a book. So I got to have lunch with him every day for a week. And I will follow his recommendations because I like him so much. And that has actually led me to learn all this stuff. Or, sorry, not follow his recommendations, listen to his voice.
Mm-hmm.
Learn all this stuff that I would never have picked that book up. And like
Oh,
one is on
see?
cybersecurity.
There you go.
One was about where a plane that couldn't land in New York landed in Nova Scotia, I think. And his voice and his personality comes through so much in his voice that I've learned all this stuff. And then I had to stop doing that after the cybersecurity book because it terrified me.
There you go. And I wonder if Ryan Minto in the chat room has read some of those same books. Ryan says, I dig military history. So I get book recommendations from podcasts like The Fat Electrician and The Sean Ryan Show. And Ryan also says, I know he's got taste intelligence.
Oh, I bet
and
I can guess, but why
savoir-faire.
don't you tell me?
He says, the only fiction I read are Sigler books.
Oh, Lord.
That's my man. That's my man. And I left my phone in the other room, but Ryan, there's a new book by Mike Cole, Mykecole. It is called The Iron Lobsters or The Armored Lobsters or something like that. It is a military history book about this brief period of time where knights in full armor were carrying around firearms. And what's it called?
Steel lobsters.
Steel lobsters. Ryan, I recommend Steel Lobsters. Mike has a bright, sharp, highly intelligent voice. He is an exceptional history writer, and it's really, really fun. There was this one shining moment for like 2 months where dudes completely encased in armor, head to toe, bulletproof armor, in effect, riding around on fucking giant-ass horses. And everybody carrying around 2 pistols and a carbine were just dominated the battlefield of one of the English revolutions. Highly recommend it. Okay,
you
let's
can
go
go
back
to
to it.
MikeCole.com. Mike is spelled with a Y. It's M-Y-K-E. MYKECOLE.com. If you scroll down that main page, you'll see the Steel Lobsters and his nonfiction.
And Chris Grawl in the chat room, I was going to recommend this one to you because it goes into a little bit of the technology of the firearms. And of course, Chris Grawl is the author of Trigger Guard. Yeah, author of Trigger Guard. So he knows everything there is to know about the origin of firearms. Paul DeWig says, I find books authors through social media groups and by viewing You May Also Like sections of books I already enjoy. Also, Audible sales get me to try out authors I haven't tried before. I didn't think about that one time. Thank you, Paul. I do occasionally dip into a book because Audible's got a BOGO deal. Buy one, get one free. And I'm like,
for sure.
Well, you know what? It's one credit to buy all 3 first books in the series. Let's give that a shot.
Yes.
And that will work sometimes.
For anybody who is listening who is a romance reader, which I'm newly a romance reader, that doesn't always work for romance. There are different levels of spiciness in romance, and you have to make sure you're getting the same type of spice. Otherwise, it doesn't work out.
All right. And Tyler Miller asks, like The First Law, one of my favorite books. That is I'm a fucking Joe Abercrombie stan. I'm not going to lie.
For sure, Stan.
Joe Abercrombie and George R. R. Martin and Joe Abercrombie, I think, are 2 of the people. I don't read a lot of the literary work, the intelligentsia, the words of the people who use the English language as a master painter would use an oil palette to paint a particular picture. I don't read a lot of that stuff. And there's a lot of people with massive literary horsepower to do really amazing things with the words on the page. I don't follow a lot of those guys. 2 people who really do that are George R. R. Martin and Joe Abercrombie. And their fantasy work is, all of it is must read for me. Are we missing it? Let's see. Recluse Mage says, I will not sell my red books to the used bookstore. Wait, I'm sorry. Recluse Mage says, I will sell my red books to the used bookstore, then wander the stacks on what to spend my credit on. Makes me more likely to take a risk on someone who's not on my radar. So that book recommendation is, hey, I've got these books. I got no place to store them. These are not treasures to me. I'm going to turn them in. Goes to a bookstore and does the wonderful thing for commerce and then takes the money he's got there and spends it on other books because it's not a risk. I already spent this money. Now I got some of this money back. Let's try a thing I wouldn't have spent full price on to do that.
I will say I wanted to mention there are several places, 3 of which I want to bring up, where you can check out books for free to read. One is definitely your local library. If there's a local library in your town, even if you're never going to borrow a book, I would love it if you would go get your library card. It helps keep civic funds going towards the library, which is one of the last free spaces that people can hang out in.
Let's be realistic. At this point in America right now, we're not sure what's going to happen with public libraries in the next 4 years, the next 8 years. And this isn't just the 2024 election. This has been going on for quite a while. The erosion of the library as a cornerstone of local communities, local literacy, local education.
Free access to heat, free access to bathrooms, free access to the internet, things that not everybody in your community has.
Yep.
And a rising tide raises all ships in this regard. So if you use the library already, hooray, hooray. If not, if you're never planning to use the library, but you can get a library card, please go get a library card. Consider it a Christmas or a birthday gift for Scott. His birthday is next week.
My birthday is next week.
And the
Melissa Eulis in the chat room says, support local libraries.
Yeah,
You goddamn right. You goddamn right. Sean Dyer says in the chat room, driving around with a particularly explicit audiobook makes you wonder just how soundproof your windows are. I hope that you were listening to Slay when that happened. Or Slay.
That's not the thing that I worry people hearing me listen to. It's, as I said, I'm a new romance listener. So every once in a while I will pick a book and then be like at the drive-through when terrible things happen in the back of a van. Consensual things, but terrible things. I don't want that checkout lady to know.
Interesting.
There are 2 places online that I would recommend if you do not have funds available, but you still want to continue your reading. I can recommend 2 places. One is called learnoutloud.org.
Mm-hmm.
Learn Out Loud. And it's a very basic website, but you can navigate to find classics. These are things that are free to download, free to own a copy of. They're not stealing from anybody. That's one place. The other place is Bibliomania. Bibliomania has a lot more sort of reference books than they do, but they have some fiction too.
Reference, like nonfiction, that kind of reference?
Like what you would used to call an encyclopedia.
Got it. Okay.
Tell me about the Oregon Trail or whatever. But those places you can read if you're low on funds and are happy to read a book. Sometimes they have audiobooks, but most of the time those are ebooks, but they are free. Google Books also has somewhere in the vicinity of 90,000 books that you can Google and read segments of or all of.
And a little bit of a hat tip in the chat room right now for Expeditionary Force series by Craig Alanson, who sells an enormous girthy amount of audiobooks. It's kind of crazy. Tyler Miller has a book recommendation angle, which is one I don't think I've heard before. This is sort of a 2 men enter, 1 man leaves technique. He says, I got a friend to try Earthcore, which is written by me, Scott Ziegler, in exchange for me to start the First Law book by Joe Abercrombie. Since I finished the First Law trilogy and he has done Earthcore, Fitzroy, and is starting Infected, it was a great trade. That's an interesting,
It's a really good
interesting way to talk about the social capital of book recommendations. Like, look, bro, I need you to read this book. And bro comes back like, I'll read this book if you read this book, and then you can come around back behind the counter, and you're like, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I used to be in several book groups, and this is well before the pandemic that they changed. But I will say, my three closest friends in San Diego, I all met in book groups. They're also that you're describing, we used to call a book barter.
A book barter, okay.
Yeah, so a book group is several people reading the same book, and then you rotate who chooses or whatnot.
Okay.
And a book barter is, I'll give you this if you give me that, and we go from there. But yeah, they work.
Chris Grawl in the chat room says, if it were a Sigler book, it'd be the Oregon Trail instead of the Oregon Trail. A new twist in the Donner Party. God, I want to write a cannibal book so goddamn bad, dude. Here's the thing I want to do. Like, okay, now we do this occasionally on the show. We slip into what I want to do as a creator. A book about cannibalism, but it's just chock full of recipes, right? It's chock full of recipes. So the people reading it will be like, did this motherfucker kill someone and cook them and knows how to cook a person? I think that'd be very, very fun.
There are a whole bunch of recommendations in the live stream chat, so I'll read a few of them.
Okay.
Paul, you recommend LibriVox. LibriVox actually also pirates our books, so be careful if you're listening to those, because they're not necessarily all in the public domain. We fight them pretty much every single month of the year. But there is a site called witchbook.com, and Witchbook is sort of helps you decide what you're in the mood for. Where in the world do you want to read a book from? What's your mood? Do you want to pick a book that way? It's fun to tinker around with, especially if you're trying to broaden your reach. I found it wanting to read more about sort of Australia in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, because I had watched a movie about a bank heist or something in Australia, and I couldn't quite even figure out what to read. So I really like that site, especially if you're trying to geographically expand what you read or mood-wise expand what you read.
Okay.
Obviously, Goodreads, sorry. Book Riot, did I mention that already?
You did.
Lit Lovers, Project Gutenberg. These are all places where you can either go find actual books to download and read, like Project Gutenberg has some of those, or like Lit Lovers and stuff like that. You can figure out the type of reviews that you like. I find it very similar to the several movie sites I like. If I'm looking for a very classic take on a review, I might go to Rolling Stone, but I might go to Bloody Disgusting or something like that if I want a different take.
That brings up a good point. As a horror writer, I have tried to pitch myself to Bloody Disgusting, another place. I'm like, hey, why don't you talk about this? And part of that process is going to the site and researching what books they are recommending, who the writer is for that site that is recommending the books. And I have just found there are so few book recommendations from these specialty sites like Bloody Disgusting and other things. It's almost like this has completely fallen off. Now, this is going on 20, 30 years, but the book division of newspapers went away a long time ago. Like the Grand Rapids, Michigan, Grand Rapids Press used to have a dedicated employee whose job was just to review books. That was gone 25 years ago. And pretty much now it's pretty much down to the New York Times. Entertainment Weekly is gone. So we don't have this book recommendations of this expertise. Like, I am a very talented book. I know much about the world of literature, and here are the books I'm recommending. Those seem to be largely gone, except for the New York Times. First, I'll ask chat room, is there any traditional media book reviews that you guys read? And then I'll go to you. What are your thoughts on this, eh?
I will say my thoughts, I agree with you. For books, there's not too much of that. I don't even find the New York Times book review all that reliable anymore, because that seems Bible. I don't mean to say actually Bible, but who knows? But that seems very dependent on what the editor or the person in charge of that department, what type of book they like. Then it leans into that. But I would love some sort of website that is sort of like the recipes sites that you can go to, where there is something of an expert, like a bookstore employee or owner or something, who has a review that's written, and then people can kind of comment underneath it, just like a recipe site. Like somebody puts up a recipe and then people are like, oh, that was too much salt for me. I only used half of that. Or I really loved this, but I added pecans or something like that. And that way we could have that exchange that at least I never get anymore, because I don't go to bookstores unless we're going for work. I don't go hang out at a Barnes & Noble and have coffee anymore because I cannot. But that is the sort of banter, because you'd be sitting flipping through a book in whichever section, and if you found somebody else in that section, you could maybe very well strike up a conversation about it. And of course, you'd see the shelf tags with employee picks and stuff like that.
Okay. We have one in the chat room from Ian, who says Nebula Award and other genre award programs, which is, as an author myself who dabbles in those circles, is endlessly fascinating, because some of the awards are most of the awards from places like Science Fiction Writers Association, Nebula, the Locus, the Stokers. These are invariably very, very good books that get nominated, and then very good books that get the award. You do have to watch out for, though, in my opinion, if it's an award you've never heard of, odds are you got to kind of do a little bit more research, because there are a lot of awards that are created, number one, by authors, so they can win their own award and say, I'm now an award-winning author.
Right.
And number two, a lot of those award categories are pay to play. You have to pay a fee to be in the award category, which you don't have to in HWA, SIFWA, Locus, Nebula, those aren't there. So it's an interesting thing that it's money driven.
Yeah, and I will add one other piece of that, which is this is sort of what I'm talking about finding a review site or a recommendation site that you like, because the book awards is a really good idea there. But in the chat room, Beth says, I've been very disappointed in things like the Booker Prize. So for you, that is not a good place to get book recommendations, but maybe like the PEN America Awards are, or something like that, or the the starred Kirkus reviews or something like that. And maybe those don't work for you either, but that's actually a pretty good idea. If you know, I never really liked the Booker Award books, then that might even be a good way to unrecommend, non-recommend,
Yeah, it is. No, it is.
disrecommend.
That's a topic for another time. But in a non-recommendation or recommendation canceling, there are people out there that if I hear them absolutely raving about a book, like this is a very important work, I'm like, I'm not reading that shit.
Yeah, I have people in my life with movies like that. Too.
Movies? Because I've read people like, this is a ground-shaking, earth-shattering, very important book. And I'm like, okay, I'll go check it out. I'm reading them like, dude, this is so not for me, this is the phrase used, this is so not for me, which I believe is a perfectly acceptable way for you to say, I don't like this book, but not shit on the author, not shit on the content, not shit on the publisher. You say, dude, that is so not for me.
I'm so glad you're loving it. This is not for me. Yeah, absolutely, because you're allowed to have an opinion. You can't say, I can't believe you like that. That's crap.
You know what? That's a great deep cuts for another time. Is how you and I came to be watching the same TV shows.
We've mentioned it a few times. But
it's a whole topic. It's a whole topic. In the chat room right now, we have Marianne Radulski, Zippy the Voracious, who says,
Mom.
Are you live on Thursday night? Love you both any night. And then 2 pink hearts, which are great.
Yes, Mom. That's my mom in the chat room on Facebook, if you don't know. And yes, because he was out of town until yesterday. So we had to switch it. But we're back on Wednesday.
Sean Dyer says, anti-recommendations, like the entire podcast, If Books Could Kill, or 370 pages will never get back. Do you know these? I've never heard of these. Tell me about these.
I've only heard because somebody sent it to me. My friend Allison sent it to me. 372 pages will never get back is such a great idea. Such a great idea. But yeah, exactly. These are the
So is that like, I know that I've not listened to this podcast, but how did this get made? Right? That is a thing about like, how did this, because the reason this podcast exists is completing a feature film and getting it to the point where people can see it in a theater or see it in streaming is a Herculean task. If you've never tried to make a movie, I don't think you understand how tilting at windmills it is to make a movie. The worst fucking movie you've ever seen was an enormous amount of work and willpower and money. It takes a lot. So there's a podcast called How Did This Get Made, which really slices up really bad movies. Is it like that?
Yeah, well, I've only seen one episode, but for me, or listened to one episode, but for me, it's a little less snarky than the How Did This Get Made that I've heard of.
Okay, good.
But
yeah, because that's a rough one. I really like the people on How This Get Made, but I can't watch it because they're just being so mean to people who have accomplished something that very few people in history ever have, which is making a feature film is really difficult.
In our job, we have a couplet that we say frequently, and I will do the first part and you will do the second part.
Mm-hmm.
This terrible movie
is better than any movie I ever made.
And until that's not true, there's a certain amount of respect that I'll put on that. And the same thing goes, I mean, we do put out books, but I can sort of, I don't mean to say judge a book by its cover on a book podcast, but you know what I mean? Like I can sort of say like, I know a little bit about making this better.
And having come up largely through the indie ranks, remember, I've had success at a certain level being with Penguin Random House and Del Rey and Athon. But that wasn't how it started out. I didn't get tapped on the shoulder as a 22-year-old to be like, I read about your work in your English class. It's spectacular. We're going to get you published. I had 12 years of grinding and sending out manuscripts and going to cons and giving away my books for free online to get to where I am. I say that because the shittiest cover I've ever seen on an incredibly crappy book that I actually read, I'm like, you've got a lot of time in the incubator before you're ready for the big time, is still a staggering accomplishment of focus and willpower and optimism.
Yeah.
So these, if you give me a podcast, it's like, hey, 374 pages, I'll never get back. To be honest, if that's a Stephen King book and he phoned it in and it's garbage, you can rip on that all day. But if it's like that's their second book and they're 23 and they live in Anchorage and they work on an oil derrick, you're like, come on, bro, you can't make fun of that. You
and
can't
like
rip
I
on
said,
that.
I don't know how much of that is. Did we freeze or are we go?
No, we're good.
Okay.
We're good.
But that's kind of exactly what I cannot tell you about that podcast, but maybe Sean can, because I've only heard part of one.
Okay.
But I will say, Dawn in the chat room on Facebook says that she has had people try and shit on some authors just because they are Christian or have a different belief than the person. Yeah, and and the example she uses is Harry Potter. And I used to love Harry Potter, and I will no longer recommend Harry Potter, but that's my personal decision. If you're reading Harry Potter, that's your personal decision. And if I know you and we're friends and you're insisting I read it, we may have that discussion, but it is just like all things. If this is not going to change your life one way or the other, if Dawn, you're not, I assume we're not standing over that man with Harry Potter in your hand about to bash him with it, that's none of his business. It's none of his business.
That's it. You know what? We did a podcast on this about 10 years ago. We should bring that back too. How do you separate the work from the creator?
Yeah.
And when we did it way back when, we were talking about Mel Gibson, who had done some things that were untoward, but has also made, some of my favorite movies that are a huge influence on me. So we'll talk about that. That's what we're talking about next week.
We'll talk, because that's not a bad. We'll also talk, we're going to do, it's the day before Thanksgiving in the United States. So if you guys have holiday traditions or stories or funny stories that you want to share next week, it'll be a little bit of a throwback to how this live stream began, and it'll be a little more interactive. And with what other time we have, we will talk about separating the art from the artist.
Last thing we'll mention in this is going back to the podcast that we just naturally assumed they were ripping on work. Sean Dyer says, but it's not always harsh. Sometimes they pick up on habits that authors have, like one book where every other attack threw someone into a tree. And I think you'll remember this.
Oh, I remember this.
In the GFL series, one of the phrases that A eventually had to come in and say, like, you're not going to say this again. And if you do, it's one time each book, and that is it. What was that phrase, babe?
Somebody's feet finding purchase.
Yep.
It's not only Scott, though. It's not only Scott. This is the one way that authors must, for the first, 20 years of their career, explain being precariously perched on something. And that's it.
It's trying to explain, like, the feet are sliding. No, this is one of those things. When you're watching a movie, I can see Iron Man's feet sliding because the Hulk is pushing him and he's getting pushed. And then all of a sudden, the feet lift up a little and the toes dig in. And it's like, oh, that's the moment you're like, oh shit, Iron Man's about to turn the tables on the Hulk. Visually, that works magnificent. No matter how many times you see it, it's perfect. Every time it's great. Trying to convey what you see visually in a movie to print, there's only one way to say that. Like, his cleats finally found purchase. And like, and he's like, you've used this 8 times in this book.
Well, that's it for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us.
December 4th, our guest will be author Christoph Laputka, creator of the Leviathan Chronicle. Let me do that again. Coming up in this feed will be author Christoph Laputka, our guest. He is a creator of Leviathan Chronicles, Rapscallion Agency, and the Invenios Expeditions. I think next episode in this feed, we're going to talk about separating the work from the creator.
Yep, art from the artist, and probably tell some Thanksgiving tradition stories.
We'll mix it up, a little bit mixed up. Yep. So that is it for this episode of Deep Cuts. We're delighted that you joined us. If you are in the chat room watching this right now, you are fantastic. You smell an awful lot like flowers.
We'll see you soon,
and
you guys.
We will see you soon. Good day, sirs and or